So over the years, we've gotten many big screen interpretations of the famous web slinger from Marvel Comics. But there's one that I feel goes a little unfairly dismissed. So let's swing into action as I take an in-depth look at the Amazing Spider-Man. When the parents of the young Peter Parker abscond one night under mysterious circumstances, he's left to be raised by his Uncle Ben and Aunt May. However, the lingering questions of their deaths hangs over Peter into his teenage years, and are sparked up by the discovery of his father's briefcase. This ultimately leads Peter to his father's colleague at Oscorp, Dr. Curtis Connors, who continues to spearhead their research into cross-species genetics to regenerate the human body from illness or injury, just like a reptile. Yet upon his visit to Oscorp and almost being found out by his high school crush Gwen Stacy, Peter is bitten by a genetically enhanced spider inside one of Oscorp's private labs. Soon after, he begins demonstrating strange abilities and hypersensitive behavior that he even uses to humiliate school bully Flash Thompson. This unfortunately gets him in trouble with the school and Uncle Ben, but not so much Gwen, who continues to build a fondness for Peter. Meanwhile, as Peter's brilliance becomes the key to Dr. Connors' potential breakthrough, the young Parker neglects obligations to his family. After being lectured to by Uncle Ben about responsibility, Peter becomes distraught over why his parents left him behind, and storms out on his aunt and uncle. As Ben tries to go after him, Peter's selfish emotions allow a criminal to run free from a convenience store, who ultimately shoots and kills Uncle Ben on the street. Driven by guilt and anger, Peter decides to use his newfound powers to try hunting down the perpetrator, but his actions draw the ire of NYPD Captain Stacy, father of Gwen. With the reclusive Norman Osborn inching closer to death, Dr. Connors is pressured into starting human trials with his serum, but he protests this to where he's ousted from Oscorp, and with his hand forced, Connors injects himself with the serum. While he successfully regrows his amputated arm, it soon transforms him into a reptilian monster who rampages across the Williamsburg Bridge. Now the web slinger, thought to be a vigilante, now swings into action to save the lives of innocents. While Peter confides in Gwen about being Spider-Man, the two of them grow even closer despite the secret she has to keep from her own father, who wants the wall crawler arrested. As Spider-Man and the Lizard continually clash, they soon discover each other's true identities. Now Peter must take it upon himself to save the city from the Lizard's psychotic intentions, and try to save Connors himself from the monster he has become. So The Amazing Spider-Man released to cinemas on July 3rd of 2012 ended up being kind of a contentious move for the franchise through Sony Pictures after the 2007 release of Spider-Man 3, directed by Sam Raimi, grossing almost $900 million at the box office, despite gaining the most critical reactions from fans and critics at that time. But a lot of people were so clamoring to get a Spider-Man 4, move the story forward to see where it would go next. But Sam Raimi, the producers, the studio, really could never get quite on the right page to get the right strong story to know exactly where to progress from that point onwards. And plus, Sam Raimi said he would not be able to meet their May 2011 release date to maintain his creative freedom to tell the story he wanted to tell and tell it the way he wanted to be told, because there was a lot of studio interference on Spider-Man 3, a lot of mandates that he was not happy with that really kind of messed up a lot of the story that he wanted to tell in that film. So ultimately he decided to bow out of the entire thing, and they decided to just go with the reboot. Wipe the slate clean, get a whole new set of filmmakers, new cast members, take the thing in an entirely new direction, change up the tone, and just do a different sort of approach to the entire thing. And it's kind of a very strangely telling type of thing that, even though it's not by a drastic margin, The Amazing Spider-Man and its sequel are actually the lowest grossing live-action Spider-Man films to date. They all gross a little less than the ones that came before it, and especially the ones that came after it, hitting somewhere in the $700 million range, which is not bad, but it did all kind of underperform towards their expectations where they wanted the whole franchise to go forward, to hit bigger heights and get bigger things going, and develop a lot of other things that kind of take things out when you get to the sequel, that overpack things and got things a little out of control, and just tanked it from that point onwards. But going into this film, they approached director Marc Webb, who had just done this really nice romantic comedy drama, 500 Days of Summer. It got a lot of acclaim, and they really wanted to go into much more of a contemporary, grounded, down-to-earth sort of character-centric approach for the character of Peter Parker, and Webb was very much intrigued by the idea. He was very much excited about getting into it and putting his own stamp on it, put his own mark, his own approach to the whole thing, and kind of going with an idea of like the origin of how Peter Parker became himself. Not just Spider-Man, but bring him up from when he was a kid, when he lost his parents, and being met with all this uncertainty about what happened to them, why things happened, why he's kind of lost in this entire situation, to just see the emotional avenues that the character kind of moves across in his life to the point where he becomes Spider-Man, where are the choices and where the emotional conflicts he faces getting up to that point to become the hero that we know. And so they took on that much more grounded, character-centric, modern type of feel to it, as you stark contrast to the Sam Raimi stuff, which was much more rich, vibrant, sort of comic book stylings. They took it a much more earthy type of feel to it in a certain way, how the film looks and kind of designed in a certain way to have much more of a muted tone to a lot of different things, to give a little bit more weight to the visuals and stuff like that, to give a little bit more dramatic feel and moody sensibility about how the thing is lit and shot and kind of presented to the audience, to give that weight of emotion and all these different things going on in the entire storyline, to make you feel a little bit more deeper about what's going on, deeper resonance about the things that occurred to the character of Peter Parker here, and see how that kind of moves along in the entire story to build up to the point that he becomes this fantastic hero that the entire city kind of rallies around in a certain way. It's very interesting how they present that in such a interesting visual style to the whole film that I think works very, very well to a certain degree here, because it's one of those films that came out in a time when the 3D craze, the digital 3D craze, was very much in high demand. It was one of those big things where everyone wanted to have either shot in 3D or do the post-conversion stuff like that, because it made a lot of money. A lot of stuff on that to get the extra premium ticket prices for the 3D and all these different things. It was a big craze. And they shot the film actually in actual 5K 3D format. And there's a few minor moments where I feel like the digital photography does look a little flat. I think if a lot of things were shot on film, where I think there's plenty of films that have been shot digitally that look absolutely gorgeous, look phenomenal. But it's all how you kind of treat it in post-production, how you do all the grading, all these different things, and you kind of meld things around in terms of the digital composites and all these different things that makes it look really good. A few places it kind of feels like I really would have liked a little bit of that organic film grain to just give it a little something intangible to it. Just some places where I think film would have looked better in some cases, how they captured some of the images in the film, but the style of the cinematography is so good. I just like how they just, again, use a moody sensibility with how the lighting works, and using earthy tones to kind of give it that weight of reality, the weight of seriousness in the whole film. Also having a great sense of levity to the whole thing. Just like so much of the different moments of humor that you have to bring the humanity into the story to make you feel for the characters. And talking about these characters and the fantastic new actors that got to portray these roles, we got to start with Andrew Garfield, who got himself very much noticed in David Fincher's The Social Network, and was very much a fan of Spider-Man. He was very much a fan of the Sam Raimi films with Tobey Maguire in that role, but brought his own sensibilities, his own approach to the entire thing, and had this fantastic thing at Comic-Con where no one had a clue. The guy just walked up, he was in a complete Spider-Man outfit, he was going up there to do the Q&A with the people on the stage, and he just takes the mask off and it's Andrew Garfield there and all these different things, and just like, it really kind of won a lot of people over to see his enthusiasm right there and then before they ever saw a frame of the film. It really won a lot of people over to see that this guy was very much excited to do it, had a lot of passion for it, and it definitely comes through in his performance. He's a fantastic actor. He does so many good things with this role to see, again, the progression of the emotional state of Peter Parker here, because you see all the things he has to grapple with the specter of his parents kind of being hovering over him, what happened to them, and trying to find answers to the whole thing. Going through the whole thing of finding the satchel from his father and trying to look through all this stuff to find some answers to different things. And eventually going to Dr. Kirk Connors and trying to get involved with him and kind of almost vicariously kind of learn something about his father through Connors and get deeply involved with that without entirely understanding the full ramifications of where things are going with the sort of Oscorp sort of involvement of what Connors is trying to do and how they are going to eventually sort of corrupt it and do all these different things that are very unethical and very dangerous type of stuff. And that branches out the entire family dynamic there, where you have Martin Sheen as Uncle Ben and Sally Field as Aunt May, and having to deal with that family dynamic that Ben pretty much is very much aware that he was not really kind of anticipating to have to raise Peter as a kid into young adulthood, stuff like that, and knowing that he's not a proper replacement for Peter's actual father. He's done the best he possibly could under the circumstances that were kind of forced upon him. And so there's a very interesting dynamic where he's always done as much as he can, knowing that Spectre's kind of hovering over top of him and always trying to protect him from whatever tragedy kind of befell them and stuff like that. And you just see all that kind of emotion kind of build up to the point where they refashion the tragedy of the death of Uncle Ben there. It's still the exact same sort of emotional through line with a different scenario built around it, which I really much kind of appreciate in a certain way, that you're taking that something that was very, very familiar from the source material and still have it happen under the same sort of emotional sort of consequences, but take it into a different scenario, a different setting that also does feel very real again. Very much a random act of violence that after Peter storms off and he's very upset at Uncle Ben and stuff like that, and just like has this entire apathy about the situation at the convenience store. The guy's kind of being a little bit of a hard ass about the entire situation, about him being short on his change. And then the guy behind him robs the place, and he's not very concerned about doing the right thing at the right time, which Uncle Ben just told him about. You have the responsibility to do good things when you have the opportunity to do them, which is kind of the almost some kind of refashioning the sort of almost sacred line or whatnot of great power comes great responsibility. Kind of try to slide around that in a different way, and it doesn't entirely fully connect as well as a lot of people would like, but the message is still there about what Peter should be doing in these situations and not have his sort of selfish emotions kind of dictate these behaviors. His morality, his ethical sensibility should be the thing that he follows, and he doesn't at that point, and it results in Uncle Ben dying on the street there from that random act of violence from the guy he allowed to run free from the convenience store. And such the interesting thing how this entire thing progresses from that point forward. How you see that Peter's takes all these powers he starts to understand and trying to fashion around here, and tries to become a vigilante. He follows a vendetta, trying to hunt all these guys down. He thinks it's possibly this guy that killed Uncle Ben. And you're not entirely fully certain exactly what he would do if he found the guy. And it's the very interesting thing that the film takes a certain path after a certain point where he never does find the guy. He stops hunting him down and he takes a corner. He turns around in the entire thing when the entire thing with the lizard starts coming up, when he attacks the bridge and everything like that, and all these people who are in peril, who are going to die, and all these different things, he takes that turn to become a hero. When he stops going out there to try to hunt down bad guys and punish people, and goes out there to save people. That's when he becomes a hero in the film. Beautifully sums that up with a fantastic sequence there, where he saves the kid, takes the mask off, tells the kid, you put this mask on, it's going to give you powers to make you strong. It feels so absolutely quintessential Spider-Man to have that heart in that moment, to extend that outwards. It's such a beautiful moment, and just that wonderful camera movement after the whole thing where you just have that wonderful piece of score coming up over. It's like, it just marks it like, at this point in time, he is Spider-Man. He is the hero now. He is no longer a vigilante. He's not out there following a vendetta. He has turned the corner. He's become the hero that we want him to become. And it's fantastic. And I just like so much how they did redesign the costume a little bit of an update, whatnot, because I kind of really like how they took our Andrew Garfield's much more leaner, sort of long physique or whatnot, and fashioned longer lines on the entire suit. I always thought the Spider-Man costume in some places could have used a little update here and there, a little bit of different flavor to it. And I thought they did a really nice job to do that, and this thing really comes off well on screen. And just like, Garfield's fantastic. Everything he does in this whole film, when you get some of the humor in the whole thing, where he's starting to figure out his powers in a certain way, and they're going a little bit haywire, a little overloaded in a certain place where he's down the subway and he's got jacked by the guys and he's flipping and flopping around, not knowing exactly what the hell is happening to him. When he's typing on the keyboard and all the keys come up on his fingers. It's wonderful, witty, beautiful, humorous stuff that it just fits so well for the character. I like so much what they do with a lot of these things. It shows a lot of the whimsical sensibility you could have with the character. I just love so much they get so much of the wisecracks for Spider-Man, this whole thing. It's one of those signature things that I really, really like that they get into this whole film. They just kind of spouting off wisecracks at the criminals here and there and have all this sort of banter here and there. It's wonderful. I absolutely loved it. It just brings so much more character out and so much dynamics with just Peter and Spider-Man all together, and the fantastic stuff they do all over the place with just trying to deal with all this stuff and come to the sense of responsibility to know that he gave Connors this sort of algorithm to create this entire sort of thing going on to create this sort of monster that's now wreaking havoc across the city. He knows he has to stop it himself because he helped create it. I like that as that goes along, the arcs kind of come together. The stuff early in the film resonates back and forward in the film. It's great type of stuff. And the character of Peter Parker is wonderfully wrapped together in this whole film with an absolutely marvelous actor. Andrew Garfield hits everything off on such a fantastic level with so much heart and charm and just so much likable quality that this still is the one that is the most relatable to me. A lot of the nerdy stuff in 2012 wasn't the same as it was back in the 60s or different eras or whatnot. As the social network kind of showed whatnot, nerds kind of run the world in a certain way. They're all the tech gurus and all these different things, so it's not the same sort of dynamic in a social context as it used to be. So they found a different approach. They found a much more modern sort of interpretation to kind of take with the character of Peter Parker here. And for me, it worked very well. It felt very relatable to me and just resonated very strongly how he handled certain situations and just kind of moved around the entire film. Just had fantastic chemistry with absolutely everyone he has, including the incredible Emma Stone, who everyone has seen in so many fantastic films at this point. She's an amazing actress. Just every single time she steps on screen, she just knocks it the hell out. And she was such a great Gwen Stacy. She was just this bright, wonderfully intelligent and sharp individual in the whole film. She brings so much spirit to the entire film. You can just see exactly why Peter would just be so enamored with her. Just have her this sort of beacon in the whole thing where she's someone who doesn't kind of fear or cower in danger. She's very much someone who has that same sort of hero sensibility. She'll put others ahead of herself in certain situations. As you get to the end of the film and Peter's telling her, you got to get out of Oscorp. Lizard's coming there. It's going to wreak havoc and shit like that. She thinks about everyone else in the building before she even takes any time to try to put herself in a safe situation. I love that entire quality. I love the entire dynamic between the two of them. They have amazing chemistry throughout the entire film. You just have the sweetness and the endearing qualities between both of them. They're absolutely a wonderful couple, this whole thing. Just like, I love so much what they do together. Emma Stone, it just flat out just one of the best actresses there is, period, at this point in time. It's phenomenal type of stuff. And speaking of such things, Denis Leary, who had been very much hitting it out of the park with the FX series Rescue Me up to this point in time, does a really solid, reliable job as Captain Stacy. And they really cast him because he's almost the spitting image of the character in the comics. If I was all because, I'm on Rescue Me, I got all this sort of critical acclaim and they know all this type of stuff. It's like, no, you kind of looked exactly like the character, how he has always been envisioned. But I was like, still, Leary's a damn good actor. Rescue Me was a really good show, and he pulled his weight every single time he was on that show as the lead character. Is like he really just comes together. It's like he's still got a little bit Denis Leary snark in there and stuff like that, but it still kind of works for the character. Because you see he's a very stand-up, upright type of cop. It's like, even though we got this scene where Peter's going into the station and he's ranting and raving about Kirk Connors turning himself into a giant lizard monster, and it's like he seems like the most craziest person in the entire goddamn city, Captain Stacy still takes that extra moment. It's like, let me just look into Connors. Have someone pull a file, see what we got on him, just let me look into it, because he's a consummate cop. And he looks into these things, he doesn't overlook anything. It's his job to protect the people of this city. And he's not going to overlook anything out of safety. It's just one of those little beats that they write in the whole thing that really kind of comes off very, very well. And I like how Leary just has a little bit of a way of having a measured response to certain things. I like how he's very much just a little bit in line, even though he can be a little bit strong and very stern, but he still has this sort of wavering quality to kind of deal with certain situations. And like how he turns the corner when he finds out that Peter is Spider-Man. He takes the entire thing. It's like, you changed my mind about everything, kid. Knowing what you're doing, going out there and doing the same thing I kind of do every single day, changes his mind about Peter Parker, about Spider-Man, all these different things. It's a really good sort of character dynamic, character arc for that character alone. And then you just got this stellar Welsh actor, Rhys Ifans, as Dr. Curtis Connors here, just doing another magnificent job. Just like the quality of his performance here just gives so much weight to the story. And just this sort of interesting, sort of tortured, misguided antagonist that so many of the kind of rogues gallery of Spider-Man kind of really kind of tap into so much that they kind of become these sort of victims of their own sort of machinations in a certain way, and kind of fall prey to the wrong things going on with their lives, stuff like that. They make the wrong choices towards certain ends that kind of befall them, just like with Curtis Connors here, this guy, in a certain different way than Peter. Peter's so much this sort of incomplete character because he's got all these questions that no one can answer about what happened to his parents and have this stuff kind of swirling around in his life. Connors obviously is very incomplete, having part of his arm being gone for so many long years, and being in this sort of situation that he'd been working on with Richard Parker, creates this entire breakthrough or whatnot to kind of regrow limbs and re-heal type of stuff that certain other species are able to do, and doing this whole cross genetics type of thing to kind of just develop it to obviously be a sort of thing to save the life of the unseen Norman Osborn in this whole thing. But how it kind of comes together with his entire character, who's so much presented early on as a sort of consummate professional scientist. The guy who won't kind of break his ethics when Norman Osborn's sort of executive right-hand guy comes in there and starts to poke and prod and saying, oh, you got a little breakthrough here, whatnot. We're going to go off and do these unethical, dangerous human trials now and kind of do it on unsuspecting people. It's like, I'm not going to be part of this. I'm not going to do this. And all these different things. So it's like he stands up to this entire thing, but once he's pushed to where it's going to be the breaking point, he's not going to have that opportunity to kind of heal himself the way he's been working so hard to make it. He goes off the deep end. He goes radical with the whole thing, and it starts to corrupt his entire sort of psychology in this whole thing. Getting injections and getting transformed. His metamorphosis alters his psychology and breaks him in a certain way where he can't think like the consummate scientist he used to be. And this entire thing where it's just like, he's such a powerful actor, this whole thing. You just see the captivating pathos he brings to the screen with his character having such great presence and such a measured way of acting on screen, just knowing the subtleties of what he can bring to the entire performance to bring out different sort of eerie or creepy type of things going on with him. It's very interesting how they meld all these little pieces of emotion and the complicated conflicts within the character in his magnificent performance here. It's absolutely fantastic what he does in this role to just kind of elevate it and escalate the entire way of how he's deteriorating psychologically and becoming much more insane, as you would probably say, more of this psychosis that overcomes him in the entire film. And while Peter's there trying to save him, like another thing where you see the heroism of Peter as Spider-Man, He's not trying to kill him or destroy him. He's trying to save the man inside the monster. I love that so much about this entire thing. He doesn't give up hope on these people. It's wonderful stuff. I love the entire dynamics you have between Garfield and Ifans. They're just electric type of stuff. Electric in these scenes, playing so many subtleties and so much rich type of character depth is fantastic. And all these different things come together with such a great type of things, with so many really interesting things, how they just take even a character like Flash Thompson, who's typically kind of just played off as sort of one-note, two-dimensional school bully. I like that they even give him an arc in the whole film, where he starts off, again, just like you know him. He's a guy who roughs people up, he's a bully, he's a jackass. Peter kind of humbles him, he kind of humiliates him in that basketball court. And you just see how these things, like, after Uncle Ben gets killed, Flash comes up to him just like, I'm sorry your uncle's died. It's like these little moments where you start to break the character down, break that hardened sort of exterior that he just is just a jackass, and you just see more of a humanity inside the character. He comes up to him and tries to level with him, just like, I'm sorry that happened to you. And at the end of the film, he's wearing the Spider-Man shirt, and he's kind of playing around with Peter or whatnot. It's like, I like so much they did that. It's a really just something that always just struck me from the first time I saw the film. I really appreciate that they did that. I appreciate they showed a little dimension for the character of Flash Thompson that you really didn't have to do, but it adds something more into the substance of what they were telling with this story and how they're presenting the characters and giving that resonance to everything. They don't leave anything two-dimensional or flat. They kind of develop things as the entire film goes on between everyone. When you get Emma Stone towards the end of the film after Captain Stacy's been killed by the lizard, and this wrenching emotion that gets poured out in the entire scene there with trying to figure out why Peter wasn't there at the goddamn funeral and whatnot, it's powerful. And they just wring out all the emotions in the entire film through such great performances from fantastic actors. Everyone from top to bottom does a wonderful job of this whole thing, embodying some really new interpretations and new emotional and dynamic and dramatic sort of interpretations towards these characters. I think they all did a really damn good job. I really appreciate every little thing they did with the characters in this version of Spider-Man. But also bringing so much life and so much character into this film is the stellar score composed by James Horner, who I think just absolutely zeroed in on this soaring beauty and fantastic heroism encapsulated in such a magnificent fashion here. The themes that he creates for Spider-Man starts out on such a small, intimate, personal type of motif, and just builds as the film goes on. It creates a much fuller, lusher type of thing into a full heroic score as the film progresses. Just like everything he does with the entire film creates an ambiance for the character and a certain way of just kind of drawing you into the emotion of the film, getting you into the heart of the characters. And of course, some of the little bit of horror here going on with Kirk Connors as he's going through this metamorphosis, and all these terrifying things are happening with him. It just stirs up so many different things to create such a powerful score, in my opinion, because there's been a lot of other composers that have stepped up to do scores for these Spider-Man films, but it won't quite hit the quality that I feel James Horner perfectly hit here, with such a beautiful score, a beautiful theme and everything like that, just like everything wrapped together is such a wonderful, inviting, warm type of thing. It's a fantastic score. I think it's one of the best that he's done. Certainly one of the best in terms of the Spider-Man scores altogether. I just think everything he did here ultimately ended up being a very singular type of thing, because as they went into the sequel and Horner looked at the script, he found it very, very unfavorable. He didn't like the script at all for the second film and bowed out of it. And so they brought in Hans Zimmer and a whole bunch of other collaborators and did a whole completely different type of score, threw all of Horner's stuff out, did something completely different that just did not measure up whatsoever for what the beauty of what James Horner put together for this film. It reflects the simplicity and the grounded sensibilities of the filmmaking style. Everything weaves together so beautifully, and just like James Horner was one of the absolute best composers out there. We lost him a couple years ago, but I would think what he did with The Amazing Spider-Man should never go underlooked. It's a fantastic piece of work here. And the effects work of this film is a very interesting thing to talk about, because as you get in the whole thing, where they're doing all the 3D stuff now, as I said earlier. And this is the first opportunity to kind of take the web slinger and put him into a very 3D theatrical environment. And I never saw the film in 3D, but how they weaved all these sequences together. How he's swinging through the city, all these different things, having these very long takes that follow him through all the different flip-flops and all these different things he's doing to swing through the city. Is very impressive type of stuff, how they put all that together to create a very free-flowing experience. I love how it's almost like as Peter's kind of jumping around on these alleyways, stuff like that, escaping from certain people or going into action or whatnot. Feels almost like a hyper-realized parkour type of thing, how he's going about it and stuff like that. So it's like, with the mixture of the wire work they did to make as many things practical as possible, did everything that was possibly done practically, and when they reached the limit of that, that's when the digital effects took over. So they only used the digital effects where they needed to enhance things and go beyond what physics could allow them to do. I very much like that approach. I like how they use the tools at their disposal, because Marc wanted to be tangible as much as possible going into the film and dealing with all these different fantastic action sequences, all these different sort of things they envisioned for the whole film that I think really do come off very well in the whole film. The lizard's kind of an interesting type of thing, though, because it is a good effect. And the design was kind of a contentious type of thing at first, because they did this much more sort of humanized type of face with not the long snout or whatnot, but apparently on the original introduction of the lizard in the comics, that's more how he originally looked, and they kind of developed his look later on and came to much more of a long snout, nose, stuff like that as the commonplace thing, but they brought it back because they felt like for the film, if we're going to have Connors as the lizard talking in these sequences, it'd be a little easier for it to be kind of accepted by the audience. It was had a little bit more of a meshing between the reptilian and the human type of facial features, stuff like that. It'd be a little easier to grasp, but it's still kind of this visual that's kind of hard to kind of absorb into reality. Every time I keep watching, it's like they're good effects because they made this one little sort of model head or whatnot for like reference sake in certain places, and like what they rendered in the CGI looks exactly like that bust. But it's just an interesting type of thing. It's like this big sort of 8-foot lizard that kind of talks and runs around and is very intelligent. It's like it's a hard visual to kind of reconcile in your head as being real, when obviously it's not. So it's like, it's a very good effect. It's just hard to kind of weave it around in your brain and kind of lock into place. It's like, okay, I can buy into that. It's just a little difficult. It's not the quality of the effects. It's reconciling it within the reality of the world here. And it's a little tough to come by, but all the makeup effects they did, when they have little patches of the different reptilian skin on Rhys Ifans as Kirk Connors as he's transforming back and forth, and he's keeping more reptilian traits as he goes back. Really smart type of stuff, and like the claw marks against Peter's chest are really goddamn good. All these little things really show attention to detail, really good quality of how they designed and developed and kind of execute all these effects, whether they're practical or the more digital type of stuff. I think they did a really good type of work there. It's just a really good type of experience, I think, with a lot of the effects. Maybe a few little things are just a tad bit, a little less than fantastic, but I think on the whole of it, I think they came together with a really good package of creating, even in a 2D setting, watching it without the 3D stuff, they still create a very dynamic way of integrating those iconic Spider-Man poses organically into the action to make everything feel very much like almost a definitive version of Spider-Man in a visual sense. Did a fantastic job on that. I think the visual effects in general are just a really good piece of work that just create a very good type of thing to move the action in such a good way that they have, again, a lot of interesting shots here. They kind of move around in a certain way that doesn't feel too stretching of credibility in terms of the cinematographic sense, but they create a very great type of thing with all the action in the whole film, where the film isn't like as jam-packed with action as some of the other superhero films we've gotten over the last 10, 15, 20 years. But I think having the film being so much focused on character development and moving the story from the inside out from the characters is a very special type of thing to grasp for this whole thing, because a lot of the action sequences in a lot of comic book films aren't always the standout moments. A lot of the stuff we've seen, when the better ones in recent times have been like the character progressions, the character dynamics, all these different scenes showing how these characters develop and interact in the sequences. I think are a lot more the highlights than a lot of the action is. But you can kind of see maybe some audiences might have been felt like a little like, okay, yeah, it's kind of good or whatnot. It's kind of interesting, but it's not like jammed up, supercharged, stuff like that. And some of the action sequences are just they're kind of cool. They're kind of interesting. I like the whole thing in the sewer where Spider-Man's got all the webs kind of shooting out here and there to kind of be almost like a detection device or whatnot for the lizard to come out. And they have this entire thing flowing through the backwash and stuff like that. It's really cool type of stuff. But the action is kind of a little here and there and whatnot in terms of being spread out in the film in a certain way. But I like so much that they don't just throw in an action sequence just to punch up the film or whatnot. Everything's very much organic progression through the entire story of the film. Everything builds up based on where the characters are going and how the narrative develops and stuff like that. So they're very much focused on that regard with this film to see how that goes. I kind of say, like, when you get up to the third act and you got C. Thomas Howell's character, who's the one his kid gets saved by Spider-Man on the bridge there, and he's rallying everyone in the entire construction group and whatnot and get all the cranes going. It's like, it's a nice sequence. I think there could have been a little bit more emphasis on the city getting behind Spider-Man earlier in the film, because you kind of want to get really the perspective of Captain Stacy as sort of a public figure reacting to Spider-Man. There's not a lot of things going on with everyone else in the city kind of having a different opinion or kind of having a different kind of groundswell around the character or whatnot. It's not as much of a scope in that regard to really kind of have that feeling really feel organic as much as it possibly could. You just have the characters you get introduced to and have them deal with it, have them react to Spider-Man. You don't get the fuller city experience of what they feel about the character overall. So it's something that feels a little, could have had a little bit more groundwork put towards it. Just a little bit here and there to just have a little bit of seeds planted here and there to have that more of a payoff, more of an organic build in the whole film. But I think there's so many things in this film that I think are really worthwhile to give credit to. Again, the James Horner score, I absolutely love it. It's fantastic. I can't gush about it enough. And just the quality of actors you have leading this film are just phenomenal. You know, a lot of people felt like it was a little too soon to reboot it after Spider-Man 3. It was only 5 years after that, but I really grasped on this film from the first time I saw it. I really just felt like it clicked with me so well. I had some problems with the Sam Raimi stuff. They didn't really feel like my flavor overall. I felt like this one feels right to me. This one feels like the one I can hold as my own, and people have other iterations and different stuff they can latch onto and bring towards themselves. So this is a Spider-Man I really kind of latched onto very strongly. I think it's a really good film. I think it's a really good one that really should not get dismissed too much, because you got so much love for the Sam Raimi stuff, and the Marvel Cinematic Universe stuff is such a big craze. This one's gotten a little bit overshadowed, especially with the sequel. They got, as I said before, over-bloated, heavily criticized, stuff like that, and made the least amount of money of all these live-action films. So ruined a whole bunch of things for Sony Pictures with their plans to do a whole cinematic universe based around Spider-Man. The first film, should go back and watch it, because it's a really good piece of work, a really solid piece of dramatic character work for these characters, a really solid story overall, wonderful actors, good direction, score is amazing. Go check it out again if you haven't seen it in a long time. It still holds up for me. After 8 years, it's still a very fantastic film. So guys, I'd like to hear your opinions about The Amazing Spider-Man below. Let me know all about it. I just want to share this whole film because I think it just, as I said, deserves a little bit extra love. So guys, thanks so much for sticking around here. Hope to see you around soon. So guys, thanks much. Take care. Bye-bye.